The first thing Lydia Thorne noticed when the handcuffs clicked shut around her wrists was how cold the metal felt against her skin. The second thing was the flash of cameras, 100 phones raised like weapons capturing her humiliation in high definition. The third thing, and this was the one that made her knees buckle, was the look on Cornelius Ashford's face. Not anger, not betrayal, not just a terrible hollow emptiness, as if someone had carved out everything inside him and left only the shell. Vivian Lockhart's voice cut through the ballroom like a knife through silk. She poisoned the old man for the inheritance. She's a con artist, a gold digger, and you all fell for it. The crowd pressed closer. Lydia could smell expensive perfume mixing with sweat, could hear the whispers spreading like wildfire through Charleston's elite. Her gold dress, the one Cornelius had bought for her, the one that had made her feel like she belonged, now felt like a costume, a joke. Security guards flanked her on both sides, their grips firm but not cruel. One of them was young, couldn't have been more than 25, and he wouldn't meet her eyes. Cornelius stood 20 feet away, holding a manila folder. His hand trembled, just slightly, enough that the papers inside rustled, a sound somehow audible even over the chaos. He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. But whatever he meant to say dissolved into the noise. The police detective stepped between them, a woman with gray streaks in her dark hair and eyes that had seen too much to be impressed by ballrooms or diamonds or accusations shouted by socialites in $10,000 gowns. "Miss Thorne, you have the right to remain silent." Lydia's vision blurred, not from tears she'd learned years ago that tears solved nothing, but from the sheer impossibility of it all. 3 days ago she'd been scrubbing tables at a diner in Mount Pleasant. 2 days ago she'd been standing in front of an easel, her hands steady as she applied solvent gel to a 300-year-old canvas. Yesterday she'd been laughing with Dorothea Ashford in the kitchen of the family estate, learning to make she-crab soup the old low-country way. Now this. The detective's voice droned on something about rights and lawyers and evidence, but Lydia couldn't hear it anymore. All she could hear was the memory of Thaddeus Ashford's voice, cold and certain, echoing in a warehouse that smelled of rust and old rope. "You're Rosalind Ashford, and I'm finishing what I started 20 years ago." The screen went black. White text appeared. 36 hours earlier. Morning broke over Charleston with the kind of heat that promised misery by noon. Lydia pulled her hair into a tight bun as she walked down King Street, her sneakers slapping against pavement still damp from the sprinklers that ran every night outside the historic homes. She'd already been awake for 3 hours. The diner shift started at 4:30, which meant she woke at 3:45, dressed in the dark, and walked the 2 miles because the bus didn't run that early and she needed to save every dollar. Her phone buzzed. A text from the Medical University of South Carolina. "Marco Thorne scheduled for consultation, Dr. Pemberton, 2 p.m. today. Please confirm." She confirmed, deleted the message, kept walking. The Ashford room didn't open until 11, but staff had to arrive by 9 for prep. Lydia let herself in through the back entrance, past the dumpsters and the smoker's corner where the line cooks took their breaks. The kitchen was already alive with noise pans clanging, someone shouting about shrimp stock, the hiss of something hitting hot oil. Russell Blackwood, the floor manager, stood near the expediting station with his arms crossed. He was 42, balding, and had the kind of face that looked like it had never smiled without calculating the cost first. "Thorne, you're on water and bread today. The Ashfords are coming in for lunch." Lydia's stomach tightened. The Ashfords came once a month, always the same table by the window, always the same order. Cornelius Ashford, silent and severe in his tailored suits. Dorothea Ashford, his mother, who wore pearls that had probably been in the family since before the Civil War. And lately Vivian Lockhart, who draped herself over Cornelius like expensive upholstery and treated the staff like furniture that occasionally needed dusting. Understood. Russell stepped closer. His breath smelled like coffee and something sour. "Do not speak unless spoken to. Do not make eye contact with Mr. Ashford. If his mother complains, you nod and disappear. If the fiancée snaps her fingers, you move. Are we clear?" Lydia nodded. She'd heard this speech before. Every server had. The Ashfords weren't just wealthy, they were Charleston royalty. the kind of family that had streets named after them and portraits in the city museum. Cornelius Ashford ran Ashford Shipping Lines, a company that had survived wars and recessions and changing economies for 150 years. His word could make or break careers. His displeasure could end them. She tied her apron, checked her reflection in the polished steel of a refrigerator door. Dark circles under her eyes. A small scar on her chin from falling off her bike when she was 7. Hair that refused to stay completely smooth no matter how much gel she used. She looked tired. She was tired. But she couldn't afford to show it. The lunch rush started at 11:30. By noon, every table was full, and the noise level had risen to that particular frequency that meant money was being spent and reputations were being maintained. Lydia moved through it like a ghost, refilling water glasses, delivering bread baskets, clearing plates. Invisible. That was the key. Be competent enough that no one noticed you, but not so competent that you stood out. At 12:15, the front doors opened and the restaurant fell into a hush. Cornelius Ashford walked in first. He was 62, though he looked younger, the kind of younger that came from personal trainers and dermatologists and a life without the stress of wondering how to pay for groceries. His hair was silver at the temples, dark everywhere else. His suit was charcoal gray, perfectly tailored. His eyes were the color of steel in winter. Behind him came Vivian, 29, blonde, wearing a red dress that probably cost more than Lydia made in 6 months. She had the kind of beauty that came with a manual, perfect posture, perfect smile, perfect nails. She laughed at something Cornelius hadn't said, a bright, performative sound. And then Dorothea. She walked slowly, leaning on a cane carved from dark wood. 68 years old, with skin like parchment and eyes that missed nothing. She wore black, as she always did, with a single strand of pearls. Her hair was white, pulled back in a bun so tight it looked painful. Russell practically sprinted to greet them. "Mrs. Ashford, Mr. Ashford, Miss Lockhart, your table is ready." They moved toward the window seat. As they passed Vivian's purse, oversized leather, probably Italian, swung out and caught Lydia hard in the ribs. Lydia gasped, stumbling back, the water pitcher in her hands sloshing dangerously. Vivian didn't even glance at her. "Watch where you're standing." Lydia steadied herself, heart pounding. Cornelius paused. For just a second his eyes met hers. There was something in that look, not quite an apology, not quite acknowledgement, just a flicker of something human before Vivian tugged on his arm. "Come on, darling, I'm starving." They sat. Lydia approached with the water, her hands perfectly steady, despite the pain radiating from her ribs. "Sparkling or still?" Vivian answered without looking up from her phone. "Sparkling for me and Cornelius. The old woman will have tap. She doesn't like bubbles." Lydia's gaze flicked to Dorothea. The older woman's face had gone very still. To call the matriarch of the Ashford family the old woman in public was more than rude. It was a calculated insult. Dorothea's voice, when it came, was quiet, but sharp enough to cut. "I will have sparkling, with lemon." Vivian rolled her eyes, scrolling through her phone. "Whatever, just bring it." Lydia poured the water with the precision she'd learned from years of practice. As she leaned in to place the glass near Cornelius, she caught the scent of his cologne, something woodsy and expensive. He looked up, and for a moment their eyes met again. He looked exhausted, not physically tired, but worn down in some deeper way, like a man carrying weight he couldn't put down. "Thank you." His voice was low, almost gentle. "You're welcome, sir." Vivian snapped her fingers. "Excuse me, I didn't ask for ice in mine. Take it back." Lydia looked at the glass. There was no ice. "Ma'am, there's no—" "I said take it back. It looks cold. I hate cold water. Bring me room temperature." "God, is it so hard to find competent help these days?" Vivian laughed, looking at Cornelius for validation. He didn't smile. He stared out the window at the street beyond, at the tourists taking photos and the horse-drawn carriages and the world that existed outside this moment. "Just change the water, please." Lydia took the glass. Her knuckles were white around the stem. "Right away." She walked back to the service station, gripping the counter until the urge to throw something passed. A fellow server, Marcus, glanced at her. Rough table. The usual. She poured new water, let it sit until the chill faded, carried it back, set it down in front of Vivian without a word. Better. Vivian didn't look at her. Lydia retreated to the wall, hands clasped behind her back, waiting. Invisible again, the way she needed to be. The meal progressed. Appetizers arrived, she-crab soup, oysters on ice, fried green tomatoes. Vivian talked constantly, dropping names of politicians and designers and charity galas. Cornelius nodded at intervals, his attention somewhere else. Dorothea ate nothing. She sat with her arms crossed, staring out the window with the kind of loneliness that comes from being surrounded by people who don't see you. Then Vivian said something that made Lydia's blood freeze. Honestly, Cornelius, we should have gone to Husk. This place is going downhill, and your mother, God, she's so difficult. Everything's too cold or too hot or too something. It's exhausting. Dorothea's fingers tightened on her cane. Her voice when she spoke was barely above a whisper, but Lydia heard it, heard every word, because Dorothea wasn't speaking English. Dis woman gwine kill me would she mean mout. Lord send me a sign. Gullah. The old low-country Creole, the language of the Sea Islands, and the descendants of enslaved people who'd kept their culture alive through centuries of brutality. Lydia's grandmother had spoken it, had taught it to her in the quiet hours after school when they'd sit on the porch in the Appalachian foothills and shell peas and talk about roots and history and the words that carried power. This woman is going to kill me with her mean mouth. Lord, send me a sign. Lydia's heart hammered. She shouldn't respond. She should stay silent, stay invisible, do her job. But something in Dorothea's voice, the resignation, the loneliness, the quiet plea for someone, anyone to see her, broke through every rule Lydia had built for survival. She stepped forward, looked Dorothea in the eye, and answered in Gullah. Ma'am, eagle ain't fly would crow. The silence that followed was absolute. Dorothea's head snapped up. Her eyes went wide, first with shock, then with something else, something sharp and searching. She stared at Lydia like she was trying to solve a puzzle, her gaze roaming over Lydia's face, her hair, her neck. And then Dorothea saw it. The birthmark. Small, shaped like a magnolia flower just below Lydia's left ear. Most people never noticed it. Lydia had learned to keep her hair down to angle her head just right. But Dorothea saw it now, and the color drained from her face. Cornelius set down his wine glass. The clink of crystal against wood seemed loud enough to shatter windows. What did you just say? Lydia's mouth went dry. She'd made a mistake. A massive career-ending mistake. She should apologize, walk away, disappear into the kitchen and hope Russell didn't fire her on the spot. But Dorothea spoke first, her voice shaking. Where you from, child? The question hung in the air. Lydia swallowed. My father's from the mountains, ma'am, West Virginia. But my grandmother was from the low country. She taught me. Dorothea's hand went to the pearls at her throat. Her fingers trembled. What's your name? Lydia Thorne, ma'am. Vivian slammed her hand on the table. Silverware jumped. Excuse me, what is happening? Is this some kind of secret code? Cornelius? Are you going to let the help mock us in a foreign language? Cornelius held up a hand. His eyes were fixed on Lydia, and there was something in them now. Not anger, but a terrible dawning awareness. You speak Gullah? It wasn't a question. Yes, sir. My grandmother spoke it. It's been 20 years since I heard anyone else. 20 years. The words came out strangled. Cornelius stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. Every head in the restaurant turned toward them. Cornelius, what are you doing? Vivian's voice was shrill now, panic creeping in at the edges. But Cornelius didn't look at her. He stared at Lydia like she was a ghost, like she was something impossible made flesh. Dorothea rose slowly, leaning heavily on her cane. She took a step toward Lydia, then another. Turn your head, child. Let me see your neck. Lydia obeyed without thinking. Dorothea's breath hitched. A sound escaped her throat, half gasp, half sob. Sweet Jesus. Vivian stood, her face flushed red. This is ridiculous. Cornelius, sit down. We're leaving. Now. But Cornelius didn't move. His hand reached into his jacket pocket, pulled out his phone. His fingers shook as he dialed. James, I need you at the Ashford room immediately. Bring the file. The Rosalind file. Lydia's knees felt weak. Rosalind. She'd seen that name before. On the newspaper clipping a customer had left behind 2 weeks ago. The missing girl. The cold case. The age progression sketch that had made Lydia's stomach turn because the eyes in that drawing had looked so much like her own. Vivian grabbed Cornelius's arm. "What file? Who's Rosalind? What is going on?" Cornelius finally looked at her. His voice, when he spoke, was colder than Lydia had ever heard it. "Vivian, this conversation doesn't concern you. Leave." "Leave? We're engaged. We're getting married in 3 months. You don't get to—" "I said leave." The restaurant had gone completely silent. Even the kitchen noise had stopped. Vivian's face twisted ugly now beneath the makeup. "You're going to regret this. My family. My father. Do you have any idea what you're throwing away? For what? Some waitress who learned a party trick?" She turned to Lydia, and the venom in her voice was pure poison. "Congratulations. You just destroyed your life for 5 minutes of attention. I hope it was worth it." She stormed out, heels clicking like gunshots against the hardwood floor. The door slammed behind her. Slowly, the ambient noise of the restaurant resumed conversations, picking up again, silverware clinking, the world moving forward because it always did. But at the table by the window, time had stopped. Dorothea reached out her hand, hovering near Lydia's face but not quite touching. "How old are you, child?" 26, ma'am." "Your birthday?" "July 14th, 1998. Dorothea's hand dropped. She turned to Cornelius, and there were tears in her eyes now, running down her cheeks and dripping onto her pearls. "It's her! Cornelius, it's her!" Lydia's vision swam. The room tilted. She grabbed the back of a chair to steady herself. "I'm sorry, I don't understand. Who do you think I am?" Cornelius's voice was barely a whisper. "My daughter. You're my daughter." The words didn't make sense. They couldn't make sense. Lydia had a father, Marco Thorne, 58 years old, lying in a hospital bed at MUSC with half his body paralyzed from a stroke. The man who'd found her at a West Virginia orphanage when she was 6, who'd taught her how to sand wood and mix varnish and see the history hidden under layers of grime. The man who'd sold his tools to pay for her first semester at SCAD, who'd driven her to Charleston when she got the scholarship, who'd cried at her college graduation, even though he'd never said the words, "I'm proud," out loud. "My father is Marco Thorne. He's at the hospital right now. I don't know who Rosalind is, but I'm not—" "You have a birthmark." Dorothea's voice cut through the fog. "Shaped like a magnolia flower, below your left ear. My granddaughter had the same mark. Exactly the same." Lydia's hand went to her neck. She'd had the birthmark as long as she could remember. Marco had told her it was special, that magnolias meant strength and dignity, that she should be proud of it. Lots of people have birthmarks. Not like that. Not in that exact spot. Dorothea pulled something from her purse. A photograph, old and creased, protected in a plastic sleeve. She held it out with trembling hands. The photo showed a little girl, maybe 5 or 6 years old, with dark curls and a gap-toothed smile. She stood on a beach holding a bucket, the ocean stretching out behind her. And on her neck, clearly visible even in the faded image, was a birthmark shaped like a magnolia flower. Lydia stared at the photo, at the girl's eyes, at the shape of her face, at the pendant around her neck, a small silver magnolia, just like the one Lydia wore every single day. The one Marco had given her when he'd found her at the orphanage. The one he'd said she'd been clutching so tight they'd had to pry it from her fingers. "Where did you get this?" Her voice didn't sound like her own. Dorothea's tears fell faster now. "I took it. The summer before she disappeared. July 2004. We were at our beach house on Edisto Island. She was 6 years old. 3 weeks later she drowned. My son's daughter. My Rosalind." The floor seemed to fall away. Lydia's ears rang. She heard herself speaking from very far away. "I didn't drown. I didn't. Marco found me in West Virginia, at an orphanage. He adopted me. He's my father." Cornelius stepped forward. His eyes were wet, his voice breaking. "We searched for 2 years. The police, the FBI, private investigators. They found her body." His voice cracked. "They found a body in the water. We buried her. We had a funeral. Then it wasn't me. But even as Lydia said it, something cold and terrible was opening up inside her chest. Because she didn't remember anything before the age of 6. She had no memories of West Virginia, no memories of how she'd ended up at that orphanage. The doctors had said it was trauma, that children sometimes blocked out things too painful to process. Marco had never pushed. He'd just loved her, raised her, given her a home. But what if Russell appeared at her elbow, his face red? "Thorne, what the hell is going on? You need to get back to work or she's done working here." Cornelius's voice was flat absolute. Russell froze. "Sir, I'm buying this restaurant, as of this moment. Call the owner. Tell him I'm offering double the asking price, cash closing in 48 hours, and Miss Thorne is no longer your employee." Russell's mouth opened and closed like a fish drowning in air. Yes, sir. Of course, sir." He fled. Lydia watched him go, her mind unable to catch up with what was happening. Cornelius turned back to her. "I know this is impossible. I know you have no reason to believe me, but my mother is never wrong about these things. And if there's even a chance—" His voice broke again. "If there's even the smallest chance that my daughter is alive, that she's standing in front of me, I need to know. Will you take a DNA test?" Lydia wanted to say no, wanted to run to go to the hospital to hold Marco's hand and tell him about the insane billionaire who thought she was his dead daughter. But Dorothea was looking at her with such hope, such desperate, fragile hope, that the word no died in her throat. Yes, I'll take the test." Dorothea made a sound like a prayer answered. Cornelius pulled out his phone again. "I'll have a kit sent to my office. We can do it this afternoon. I'll pay for the rush processing, 72 hours. And in the meantime—" he hesitated. "In the meantime, I want to know everything. Who raised you? Where you've been? What you remember." Lydia's phone buzzed in her apron pocket. She pulled it out with numb fingers. A text from MUSC. "Marco Thorne experiencing complications. Please come to ICU immediately." The world snapped back into focus. Sharp, brutal, real. "I have to go. My father Marco, he's in the hospital. He just had a stroke and they're saying he needs surgery and I don't have the money and I'll take care of it." Cornelius said it like it was nothing. Like paying for $180,000 neurosurgery was the same as buying a cup of coffee. "I'll call the hospital right now. Whatever he needs, the best surgeons, private room, full care." Lydia stared at him. "Why would you do that?" Cornelius looked at her, and in his eyes she saw 20 years of grief, 20 years of guilt, 20 years of searching for something he thought he'd lost forever. "Because if you're her, if you're Rosalind, then I owe you 20 years, and I can never give those back. But I can make sure the man who raised you gets every chance to survive. It's the least I can do." Lydia's vision blurred. She nodded, unable to speak. Go to him. I'll handle everything else." She turned to leave, stopped, looked back. "Thank you." Cornelius's smile was sad, broken. "Don't thank me yet. We don't know the truth. And when we do—" He paused. "When we do, everything might change." Lydia ran. She ran through the restaurant, past the staring diners, past Russell, who was on the phone and probably losing his mind. She ran out into the Charleston heat, down King Street, toward the hospital where Marco was fighting for his life. Her sneakers pounded against pavement, her heart hammered against her ribs, and in her mind one question repeated over and over. Who am I? She didn't see the black sedan parked across the street from the restaurant, didn't see the man sitting inside, phone pressed to his ear, his face pale and drawn. Thaddeus Ashford watched her disappear around the corner. Then he ended the call and dialed another number. It's done. She knows. Or she will soon. A pause. No, we can't let that happen. If the DNA test comes back positive, if Cornelius finds out the truth, another pause. Longer this time. I don't care what it costs. Handle it. Make it look natural. She's already got a sick father in the hospital. Tragic if they both had complications. He ended the call, started the car, drove away. Behind him in the Ashford room, Dorothea clutched the photograph of Rosalind and wept like the world was ending. Because for her, in a way, it was beginning again. The ICU at MUSC smelled like antiseptic and desperation. Lydia pushed through the automatic doors, her uniform still damp with sweat from the run, her heart a fist beating against her ribs. The nurse at the desk looked up, recognition flickering across her face. Brenda. They'd spoken 3 times this week, enough that formalities had fallen away and been replaced by the careful kindness people used when they knew bad news was coming. He's stable. For now. Brenda's voice carried the weight of experience of having delivered this exact phrase to 100 other families standing in this exact spot, hoping for miracles. What happened? Lydia's hands gripped the edge of the desk, knuckles white. Toxicology flagged something unusual in his bloodstream. Doctor Pemberton wants to run more tests, but it looks like thallium poisoning. The word meant nothing at first, then everything. Thallium, rat poison, something you had to seek out, purchase, deliberately administer with intent. Someone poisoned him. Brenda's eyes softened with something that might have been pity. We're required to report it to the police. They'll want to talk to you, but right now he's asking for you. Lydia moved past the desk without hearing the rest. Room 412. She'd memorized the number, the route, the number of steps it took to get there. 37 from the elevator. She counted them now, each one a prayer she didn't know the words to. Marco looked smaller than he had yesterday. The stroke had stolen the left side of his body, turned his face into a mask where only half the expressions worked. But his eyes tracked her as she entered, and his right hand lifted slightly from the blanket. She took it. His fingers were cold. Hey, Daddy. The word came out broken. She'd called him that since she was 7, when he'd explained that Marco felt too formal for family and father sounded like something from a movie. Daddy had stuck. It fit. His mouth moved, forming shapes that might have been words if the stroke hadn't stolen his ability to make them clear. Don't try to talk. I'm here. You're going to be okay. But even as she said it, she knew it was a lie. The kind of lie people told in hospitals because the truth was too heavy to carry and too sharp to hold. Marco's hand squeezed hers. Once. Twice. Their old code. I love you. She squeezed back. 3 times. I love you more. His eyes closed. Not sleep, but the kind of exhaustion that came from a body fighting itself. Lydia sat in the plastic chair beside his bed and tried not to think about thallium, about poison, about someone deliberately trying to kill a man who'd spent his entire life helping other people. Her phone buzzed. A number she didn't recognize. She let it go to voicemail, then watched as 3 more calls came in rapid succession. Finally, a text. This is James Whitmore, Mr. Ashford's attorney. He asked me to contact you regarding your father's medical care. I've spoken with Dr. Pemberton. Surgery is scheduled for tomorrow morning, 6 a.m. Best neurosurgeon in the Southeast. All expenses covered. Please confirm you received this message. Lydia stared at the screen until the words blurred. Cornelius had actually done it. A man she'd spoken to for less than 15 minutes had just paid for her father's life. She typed back with shaking fingers. Confirmed. Thank you. The response came immediately. Mr. Ashford also requests your presence at his office tomorrow at 2 p.m. for the DNA test. The address is attached. A car will pick you up at the hospital. She should have felt grateful, should have felt relief. Instead, all she felt was a creeping sense of unreality, as if she'd stepped through a door into someone else's life and couldn't find her way back. A knock at the door. 2 police officers, 1 male, 1 female, both with faces that had learned to show nothing. Miss Thorne, we need to ask you some questions about your father's condition. The interview took an hour. Where had he been? Who had access to his food? Did he have enemies? Had there been any unusual visitors? Lydia answered mechanically, her mind elsewhere, thinking about Magnolia birthmarks and photographs and a little girl who'd drowned 20 years ago. Except maybe she hadn't. When they finally left, Brenda appeared with coffee that had gone lukewarm and a sandwich Lydia couldn't imagine eating. You should go home. Get some rest. We'll call if anything changes. Lydia shook her head. Home was a studio apartment in Mount Pleasant with water stains on the ceiling and a landlord who'd taped an eviction notice to her door 3 days ago. 3 months behind on rent. She had 72 hours to pay or get out. She stayed in the chair beside Marco's bed and watched the monitors track his heartbeat, his oxygen levels, his slow slide toward whatever came next. Somewhere around midnight, exhaustion pulled her under. She dreamed of water, of hands pulling her down, of voices speaking a language she understood but couldn't name. She woke to sunlight streaming through the window and Brenda's hand on her shoulder. "Surgery's in an hour. You'll want to say goodbye before they take him up." Lydia stood, her body aching from the chair, from the run, from carrying weight she hadn't known was there. Marco was awake, watching her with eyes that held too much knowledge. She leaned close. "The surgery's going to work. You're going to be fine. And when you wake up, I'll be right here." His hand found hers, squeezed once, twice. She squeezed back 3 times, then stood frozen as they wheeled him away, watching until the elevator doors closed and he disappeared from view. The waiting room was designed for grief. Pale blue walls, magazines from 2 years ago, a television playing morning shows with the sound turned down. Lydia sat in a chair by the window and stared at Charleston, waking up tourists already flooding the streets, horse-drawn carriages starting their routes, the city performing its role as a living museum of the antebellum South. Her phone rang. James Whitmore. "Miss Thorne, the car is waiting outside to take you to Mr. Ashford's office." She glanced at the clock. 2 p.m. The surgery had started 4 hours ago. Dr. Pemberton had said it would take 6, maybe 7, if complications arose. "I can't leave. My father's still in surgery." Mr. Ashford anticipated this. He's asked Dr. Pemberton to call his personal line with updates. You'll know the moment there's news. "I don't—" "Miss Thorne, I understand your hesitation, but Mr. Ashford was quite clear. The DNA test needs to happen today. The lab is standing by." Lydia closed her eyes, felt the walls of the waiting room pressing in, felt the weight of decisions she didn't want to make, and choices that weren't really choices at all. "I'll be down in 5 minutes." The car was a black Mercedes, the kind with leather so soft it felt like sin. The driver didn't speak, just held the door open and waited while she climbed inside. They drove through downtown Charleston, past Rainbow Row with its pastel houses, past the Battery, where cannons still pointed out to sea, past all the carefully preserved history that the city sold to tourists while pretending the ugly parts had never happened. Ashford Shipping Lines occupied a building on East Bay Street, glass and steel, rising 8 stories above the Cooper River. The lobby was all marble and money, the kind of space designed to remind visitors that they were small and the people who worked here were not. James Whitmore met her at the elevator. 60-something, silver hairsuit that probably cost more than Lydia's car. His handshake was firm but not aggressive, his smile professional. "Mr. Ashford is waiting in his office, if you'll follow me." They rode to the 8th floor in silence. The elevator doors opened onto a reception area where a woman with perfect posture and a headset typed at a computer without looking at the keyboard. She glanced up as they passed, her expression carefully neutral. Whitmore knocked once on a set of double doors, then pushed them open. The office was designed to impress. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the harbor, antique furniture that belonged in a museum, walls lined with photographs and portraits spanning generations. And behind a desk large enough to sleep on, Cornelius Ashford, looking like he hadn't slept at all. He stood as she entered. "Thank you for coming. I know the timing is difficult." His voice was hoarse, scraped raw. Lydia nodded, not trusting herself to speak. "The DNA kit is here. It's a simple cheek swab. Results in 72 hours, but I've paid for a rush. We should know in 48. He gestured to a small medical kit on the desk. Lydia stared at it like it might bite. "Before I do this, I need to know something." Cornelius waited. "Why do you think your daughter is alive? You said you found a body. You had a funeral. How can you believe?" "Because my mother is never wrong." The certainty in his voice was absolute. "She knew my wife was sick before the doctors found the cancer. She knew my father was going to have a heart attack 3 days before it happened. She told me not to trust my brother and I didn't listen. Dorothea Ashford has a gift. Call it intuition, call it whatever you want, But when she looked at you yesterday and said you were Rosalind, I believed her. Even if you're wrong, even if the DNA says I'm not her." Cornelius's face crumpled for just a moment before he pulled it back together. "Then I'll have lost my daughter twice, but at least I'll know I tried everything." Lydia picked up the kit. The instructions were simple. Swab inside the cheek for 30 seconds, seal in the tube sign the consent form. She completed each step mechanically, her hands steadier than her heart. Whitmore took the sample, placed it in a biohazard bag, sealed it with the kind of care usually reserved for evidence in murder trials. "I'll take this to the lab personally. You should have results by Thursday morning." He left. The door clicked shut. Lydia and Cornelius stood in the office, two strangers bound together by a possibility neither of them knew how to handle. "There's something else." Cornelius moved to a credenza against the wall, pulled open a drawer, and removed a folder. Manila, thick, the edges worn from handling. "This is everything we know about Rosalind's disappearance. Police reports, witness statements, the autopsy report for the body we found. I want you to read it, before the results come back. Because if you are her, you deserve to know what happened. And if you're not—" His voice broke. "If you're not, at least someone else will know the full story." Lydia took the folder. It was heavier than it looked. "What if I don't want to know? Then burn it, but I think you do. I think that's why you're here." He was right. She'd been here since the moment Dorothea showed her that photograph. Since the moment she'd looked at a 6-year-old girl with her eyes and her birthmark and her pendant and realized that every story she'd been told about her life might be built on sand. Her phone rang. "Dr. Pemberton." She answered, her voice barely a whisper. "Hello. Miss Thorne, your father is out of surgery. It went well. Better than expected, actually. He's in recovery now. You can see him in about an hour." The relief hit like a wave, stealing her breath. "Thank you. Thank you so much." She hung up. Cornelius was watching her with something that might have been envy. "Good news. The best. He made it through. I'm glad." And he meant it. She could see it in his eyes, the genuine relief that Marco Thorne, a man Cornelius had never met, was going to survive. Because if Lydia was Rosalind, then Marco was the man who'd saved her, raised her, given her the 20 years that Cornelius had lost. "The car will take you back to the hospital. Take the folder. Read it when you're ready." Lydia clutched it to her chest like armor. "Why are you doing all this? You don't know me. The DNA might say I'm nobody to you." Cornelius walked to the window, stared out at the harbor where ships moved like toys across water that had seen centuries of commerce and cruelty and survival. 20 years ago, my daughter disappeared. They found a body 3 days later washed up on the beach at Edisto Island. The face was gone, eaten by fish and time. But the size was right, the age was right, and my brother identified her by a birthmark on her neck. We buried her. I divorced my wife because neither of us could look at each other without seeing what we'd lost. I spent 2 decades believing my daughter was dead because I trusted the wrong person." He turned back to face her. "If there's a chance I was lied to, if there's a chance she survived, then everything I've done for 20 years has been a waste. Every decision, every moment of grief, every time I wished I'd died instead of her. And if you're not Rosalind, if this is just a coincidence, then I'll know for certain that she's gone, and I can finally let her rest. Either way, I need the truth. We both do." Lydia nodded. The folder felt like it was burning through her shirt. She rode the elevator down in silence, climbed back into the Mercedes, watched Charleston blur past the windows. But her mind was elsewhere, circling around one word Cornelius had said. "Brother. My brother identified her." She opened the folder. The first page was a police report dated August 15, 2004. Missing child, Rosalind Ashford, age 6, last seen at family beach house, Edisto Island. Parents reported her missing at 8 p.m. Search began immediately. Body found 3 days later. The second page was an autopsy report. Female, approximately 6 years old, cause of death drowning. Significant decomposition due to marine exposure. Positive identification made by family member Thaddeus Ashford based on distinctive birthmark magnolia-shaped located below left ear. Lydia's hands shook. She flipped to the next page. A witness statement from Thaddeus Ashford, age 45, brother of Cornelius Ashford. I was the one who found her. I'd been searching the beach and I saw something in the water. When I pulled her out, I knew immediately. The birthmark. I'd seen it 1,000 times. I had to be the one to tell Cornelius. It was the hardest thing I've ever done. She kept reading. More statements, more reports, more details about a tragedy that had destroyed a family. But something felt wrong. Like a painting where all the colors were correct, but the composition was off, where your eye kept catching on details that didn't quite fit. The car pulled up to the hospital. Lydia climbed out, still reading, walked through the lobby and up to the 4th floor without looking up from the pages. She nearly collided with Brenda in the hallway. "He's awake, a little groggy, but he's asking for you." Lydia closed the folder, shoved it into her bag. Marco's room was brighter than before. They'd moved him to a private suite, the kind with real furniture instead of plastic chairs and windows that actually opened. Evidence of Cornelius Ashford's money rewriting reality, one paid bill at a time. Marco's eyes found her as she entered. His face was still half frozen, but the right side managed something close to a smile. "Hey, Daddy." She took his hand. He squeezed. Once, twice, 3 times back. "The surgery went well. Dr. Pemberton says you should regain most of the mobility in your left side with physical therapy. It's going to be a long recovery, but you're going to be okay." His mouth moved, and this time words emerged, slurred but understandable. "What happened?" Lydia hesitated. The police report had mentioned thallium poisoning, deliberate and methodical. Someone had tried to kill Marco Thorne, and the only question was why. "Someone poisoned you. The police are investigating." His eyes widened. Fear flickered across the working half of his face. "You need to leave Charleston." The words came out garbled but urgent. "What number? I'm not leaving you." His hand gripped hers with surprising strength. "Not safe. Something wrong. You need to go." "Daddy, I don't understand. What's wrong? What aren't you telling me?" But his eyes had already started to close, exhaustion dragging him back under. Lydia sat there holding his hand, her mind racing through possibilities she didn't want to consider. The folder in her bag felt like it was radiating heat. She pulled it out, flipped to the section marked Evidence Photos. And there in black and white was the body they'd pulled from the water. Grainy, difficult to look at, the kind of image that stayed with you long after you looked away. But it was the next photo that made her stop breathing. A close-up of the birthmark, magnolia-shaped below the left ear. Exactly like hers. Except something about it looked wrong. The edges too perfect, the shape too clean for something that should have been eaten by fish and salt water. She grabbed her phone, zoomed in on the image, looked closer, and saw it. The birthmark in the photo was a tattoo, fresh enough that the ink still looked sharp despite the decomposition. Someone had tattooed a magnolia flower onto a dead child's neck to make sure the body would be identified as Rosalind Ashford, which meant the real Rosalind Ashford hadn't drowned, which meant someone had killed a different child and staged the scene, which meant her phone rang. Unknown number. She answered without thinking. A man's voice, smooth and cultured with the kind of Charleston accent that came from generations of money. "Miss Thorne, we haven't been formally introduced. My name is Thaddeus Ashford," the name from the police report, the brother who'd identified the body. "I understand you've been spending time with my family, with Cornelius and Mother. I wanted to reach out personally and warn you that you're making a terrible mistake." Lydia's heart hammered. "What are you talking about?" "My brother lost his daughter 20 years ago. It destroyed him. And now you come along with your convenient accent and your birthmark and your tragic backstory, and you're giving him hope where there shouldn't be any. It's cruel, Miss Thorne, cruel and calculated." "I didn't ask for any of this." "No." "Then why did you respond when my mother spoke Gullah? Why did you agree to the DNA test? Why are you accepting money from a man who's desperate enough to believe in fairy tales?" "Because he offered. Because my father needed surgery. Because you saw an opportunity." His voice hardened. "I know people like you, Miss Thorne. I've dealt with con artists and gold diggers for 20 years, all of them claiming to be Rosalind, all of them looking for a payout. You're just better at it than most. But I'm telling you right now, walk away. Leave Charleston. Forget you ever met the Ashfords. Because if you don't, if you keep playing this game, you're going to regret it. Is that a threat? It's a promise. My brother has suffered enough. I won't let you destroy him again. The line went dead. Lydia sat in the private hospital room staring at the phone, her mind spinning through the implications. Thaddeus Ashford had identified a body that wasn't Rosalind, had told his brother that his daughter was dead, had let Cornelius bury a stranger and spend 20 years drowning in grief. Why? She flipped back through the folder until she found it. A document dated 2005, 1 year after Rosalind's death. A probate filing showing that Cornelius Ashford had transferred half his shares in Ashford Shipping Lines to his brother as part of a grief-motivated restructuring. Thaddeus had gained control of 40% of the company after Rosalind died. Motive. If Rosalind was alive, if she came back, if she inherited what was rightfully hers, Thaddeus would lose everything. Lydia's phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Leave Charleston tonight or your father won't survive the week. No signature, no way to trace it. Just a promise of violence delivered in 14 words. She stood, every instinct screaming at her to run, to pack Marco into a car and drive until Charleston was a memory. But before she could move, the door to the hospital room opened. Dorothea Ashford stood in the hallway leaning on her cane, her face grave. "We need to talk, child, before it's too late." They found an empty consultation room, windowless and institutional, the kind of space where doctors delivered bad news and families made impossible decisions. Dorothea eased herself into a chair with the careful movements of someone who'd learned to negotiate with pain. "You've read the file." It wasn't a question. Lydia nodded. "Then you know the body they found wasn't Rosalind. You saw the tattoo." "How did you?" "Because I've known for 20 years. I told Cornelius the moment I saw that autopsy photo. Told him the birthmark was wrong, that something was off. But he was destroyed. His marriage was falling apart. His brother was the only family he had left besides me. And Thaddeus swore on his life that the body was Rosalind, that he'd checked, that he was certain." Dorothea's hands trembled on the cane. "So Cornelius buried a stranger. And I spent 20 years wondering if my granddaughter was alive somewhere suffering because I couldn't prove what I knew in my bones to be true. Why didn't you tell him about your suspicions?" "I tried, but grief makes people cruel to hope." Cornelius needed to believe she was dead, needed to bury something, needed an ending to the nightmare. And I was just an old woman with intuition and a magnolia tattoo that might have been real after all. I had no proof, no evidence, just a feeling that wouldn't leave me alone. She reached out, took Lydia's hand. "Until yesterday. Until you spoke to me in Gullah and I saw that birthmark and I knew with every part of me that God had answered 20 years of prayers." "But what if the DNA test says you're wrong?" Dorothea smiled, and it was the saddest thing Lydia had ever seen. "Then I'll die knowing I was right anyway. Because science doesn't know everything, and some truths live deeper than blood." Lydia's phone buzzed again. Another text. "Your father's heart monitor just flatlined. Shame about the malfunction." She ran, sprinted down the hallway, Dorothea's voice calling after her medical staff jumping out of the way. Room 428. She burst through the door to find Marco convulsing the monitors, screaming, nurses rushing in with the crash cart. "What happened?" She grabbed the nearest doctor, a young woman with exhaustion in her eyes. "We don't know. His vitals were stable and then everything just crashed. We're doing everything we can." They pushed Lydia back, crowded around Marco's bed, shouted medical jargon she didn't understand. She watched through the doorway as they shocked him once, twice, 3 times. Watched his body arch off the bed with each jolt. Watched the monitors flicker and scream and finally impossibly stabilize. The doctor emerged, peeling off gloves. "He's stable, for now, but someone tampered with his IV line, added something to the drip. We're testing it now, but preliminary analysis shows a paralytic agent. If we'd been 30 seconds slower..." She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. Lydia leaned against the wall, her legs suddenly unable to hold her weight. Someone had tried to kill Marco. Again. In a hospital with security and cameras and witnesses, they'd tried to murder him in broad daylight and nearly succeeded. Dorothea appeared beside her, somehow managing to move silently despite the cane. "This is Thaddeus. This is his work." "You can't know that. I've known that man for 65 years. Watched him grow from a boy who tortured animals to a man who destroys lives for profit. He killed a child to fake Rosalind's death. You think he'd hesitate to kill an old furniture restorer?" Lydia's phone rang. "Cornelius." "Are you all right? Mother just called. She said something happened at the hospital." "Someone tried to kill my father. Again." Silence on the other end. Then, in a voice colder than Lydia had heard from him, "I'm calling the police. I'm hiring private security for his room. No one gets in without clearance. No one. It won't matter. Your brother will find a way. He already warned me to leave Charleston. He knows about the DNA test. He knows everything." Another pause. "Come to my house, tonight. Bring your father when he's stable enough to move. I have security staff resources. You'll both be safe here." "Why would you do that?" "The DNA results aren't even back yet. You don't know if I'm really your daughter." "I know someone is trying to kill you. I know my brother is involved. And I know that if I do nothing and you die, I'll never forgive myself. DNA doesn't change that. So please, let me help you." Lydia looked through the doorway at Marco, alive but barely surrounded by machines and people trying to save him from enemies he'd never made. "Okay, we'll come." She hung up. Dorothea was smiling. "Smart girl, just like Rosalind would have been." "I'm not Rosalind. I don't remember being her. I don't remember anything before the orphanage." "Memory isn't the only truth, child. Sometimes the body remembers what the mind forgot. Sometimes survival means forgetting everything that came before." Lydia wanted to argue, wanted to insist that she was just Lydia Thorne, waitress and art restoration dropout daughter of Marco and nobody else. But standing in this hospital hallway with attempted murder in the air and a birthmark burning on her neck and a folder full of evidence that someone had killed a child to hide another child's survival, she couldn't quite convince herself anymore. Somewhere in Charleston, in an office with a view of the harbor, Thaddeus Ashford made another phone call. "She didn't leave. The old man's still alive." A pause. "Then we escalate. If she won't run, we remove her, permanently. And we do it before those DNA results come back. And if they prove she's Rosalind, then we make sure no one ever sees them. My brother's already lost one daughter. He'll survive losing her twice." He ended the call and stared out at the water at the ship's moving cargo that would make him richer at the city that had belonged to his family for generations and would continue to belong to them as long as he was willing to do what needed to be done. Survival, he'd learned long ago, belonged to those who refused to hesitate, and Thaddeus Ashford had never hesitated in his life. The Ashford estate sat on 12 acres of land that had belonged to the family since before the Revolution, when Charleston was still a port city built on rice and human suffering. The main house was Greek Revival, white columns reaching toward sky-live oaks draped with Spanish moss framing the circular drive. Security cameras tracked the ambulance as it pulled through wrought iron gates that cost more than most people's houses. Lydia rode in the back with Marco, watching monitors that had been stable for 3 hours now. Dr. Pemberton had cleared the transfer only after Cornelius hired 2 private nurses and equipped a guest room with hospital-grade equipment. Money, it turned out, could move mountains when properly applied. Marco's working eye tracked her face. "You don't have to do this." His speech was clearer now, the words only slightly slurred. "Progress. Someone tried to kill you twice in one day. We're doing this. But if it puts you in danger, we're safer here than at the hospital. Cornelius has security, former Secret Service, the kind of people who take bullets professionally." Marco's hand found hers. "I'm sorry." "For what?" "For not telling you the truth. About where I found you. About what you were like when they brought you to the orphanage." Lydia's breath caught. "What do you mean?" The ambulance slowed, turning onto a drive lined with camellias. Marco's eye closed for a moment, gathering strength. "You didn't speak for 6 months. Just stared at walls and held that pendant like it was the only thing keeping you alive. The orphanage said you'd been found wandering the woods near the West Virginia border. No ID, no family, no memory. Just a 6-year-old girl who'd been through something so terrible her mind had locked it away. His voice cracked. I took one look at you and knew I couldn't leave you there. Didn't matter that I was 50 and single and had no business raising a child. You needed someone and I needed to be needed. So I filled out the paperwork and lied on half of it and brought you home. Why didn't you tell me? Because you were happy. Because you started talking again, started laughing, started being a kid instead of a ghost. Why would I drag you back into trauma you'd survived by forgetting? The ambulance stopped. Doors opened. Lydia watched as the nurses efficiently transferred Marco onto a gurney, wheeling him toward a side entrance where a medical elevator waited. She followed, her mind reeling. The guest suite was on the second-floor east wing with windows overlooking gardens that probably required a full-time staff. The hospital bed looked out of place among the antique furniture and oil paintings, but the equipment was state-of-the-art. One nurse began setting up monitors while the other checked Marco's vitals. Cornelius appeared in the doorway. Dr. Pemberton will be here in an hour for evening rounds. If you need anything before then, press the call button. Security is stationed at both stairwells and the elevator. No one enters this wing without authorization. He looked at Marco. Mr. Thorne, I'm Cornelius Ashford. I'm sorry we're meeting under these circumstances. Marco studied him with the sharp awareness of someone who'd spent a lifetime reading people. You're the one paying for all this. I am. Why? Cornelius glanced at Lydia, then back. Because your daughter may be mine, and if she is, you're the man who saved her life and gave her 20 years I couldn't. That's a debt I can never repay, but I can start by making sure you survive to see her graduate, get married, have children of her own. Whatever comes next. Marco's expression softened slightly. She's a good girl. Best thing that ever happened to me. I believe you. The nurses finished their setup and left. Cornelius gestured for Lydia to follow him into the hallway. The DNA results are being expedited. We should have them by tomorrow afternoon. In the meantime, there's something I need to show you. They walked through corridors lined with family portraits, Ashford stretching back 8 generations, stern faces and formal poses, the visual history of a family that had survived by adapting to whatever version of Charleston existed at the time. Cornelius stopped in front of a door at the end of the hall. This was Rosalind's room. I haven't changed anything since she disappeared. He opened the door. The room was frozen in 2004. Stuffed animals arranged on a bed with a princess canopy, books about horses and pirates, a child's easel in the corner with dried paint still crusted on the palette, and covering one entire wall paintings, dozens of them, watercolors and finger paintings and careful sketches all signed in a child's handwriting, Rosalind Ashford, age 6. Lydia stepped inside, drawn to the artwork. Most showed the beach, the ocean gulls and shells and sandcastles. But one painting stopped her cold. A magnolia tree rendered in careful detail with a single flower blooming at the center, and beneath it a girl with dark curls holding the flower like a treasure. She painted that 2 weeks before she disappeared, told me magnolias were magic, that they protected people who needed protecting. Cornelius's voice was thick. After she died, after we thought she died, I couldn't come in here. My ex-wife packed everything up, but I made her stop. Told her to leave it exactly as it was, just in case. Just in case what? Just in case I was wrong, just in case she came home. Lydia touched the painting, felt the texture of dried watercolor under her fingertips. Something stirred in her mind, not quite a memory, but the shape of one, like seeing movement in peripheral vision that vanished when you looked directly at it. I don't remember painting this. You were 6. Most people don't remember much from that age. But that wasn't quite true. Lydia remembered plenty from age 7, 8, 9. Remembered learning to ride a bike with Marco running behind her. Remembered her first day of school, her first thunderstorm, her first time seeing the ocean. The memory started at 7 and continued unbroken to now. But before that, nothing. A blank space where the first 6 years should have been. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. You should look out the window. 3rd floor west wing. Now. Lydia's stomach dropped. She moved to the window, pulled back the curtain. Across the gardens in the main house's west wing, a figure stood in a lit window. Too far to see clearly, but the posture was unmistakable. Watching, waiting. Another text. "We need to talk. Alone. The old carriage house. 10 minutes. Come alone or your father's nurse has instructions." Cornelius was examining one of Rosalind's books, his back to the window. Lydia slipped her phone into her pocket. "I need some air. Is there a garden entrance?" "Through the sunroom, first floor, but you shouldn't go out alone." "I'll stay close to the house. I just need to clear my head." He nodded, lost in memory and old grief. Lydia left him there among the ghosts of his daughter's childhood and made her way downstairs. The sunroom doors were unlocked, opening onto a stone terrace that led to formal gardens beyond. She followed a gravel path between hedges trimmed into geometric perfection, moving toward the old carriage house that loomed at the edge of the property. The building was brick, 2 stories converted into storage or guest quarters decades ago and then forgotten. The door stood ajar. Lydia pushed it open, stepped into darkness that smelled like dust and old wood. "Close the door," Thaddeus Ashford's voice came from the shadows. Lydia's hand found the light switch. Fluorescent tubes flickered to life, revealing a space filled with furniture draped in cloth boxes stacked to the ceiling. The accumulated debris of a family that never threw anything away. Thaddeus stood beside a workbench, 65 years old, but looking younger, with Cornelius's features sharpened by something harder. He wore khakis and a polo shirt, casual wealth, and held a gun loosely in his right hand. "I told you to leave Charleston." Lydia's heart hammered, but she kept her voice steady. "And I told you I'm not going anywhere." "Then you're stupider than I thought. Do you have any idea what you've walked into? What you're about to destroy?" "I didn't walk into anything. Your mother recognized me. Cornelius invited me here. I'm just trying to survive." Thaddeus laughed, bitter and sharp. "Survive. That's rich. You survived 20 years ago when you should have drowned with the other girl. You survived the orphanage, survived being raised by that furniture restorer, survived all the way to walking back into the one place you should have stayed away from forever. You know I'm Rosalind." It wasn't a question. "Of course I know. Knew the moment Mother called me hysterical saying she'd found her granddaughter in a restaurant. Knew the second I saw your photograph. You have your mother's eyes." "Exactly." He raised the gun slightly, not quite pointing it at her, but close enough. "That's why you have to disappear. Again. Permanently this time. Because I'll expose what you did. The embezzlement, the fake body, the 20 years of lying. The embezzlement is covered. I've had 2 decades to hide money in accounts even the FBI couldn't find. But Cornelius finding out I let him bury a stranger, that I watched him suffer for 20 years over a daughter who was alive the whole time, that I destroyed his marriage and his sanity for 40% of a shipping company." Thaddeus's face twisted. "He'd kill me, literally. My own brother would put his hands around my throat and squeeze until I stopped breathing. So yes, you're a problem that needs solving. Then solve it. Shoot me. But you won't get away with it. Cornelius knows I came out here. Security cameras probably caught me walking across the garden. Security cameras have blind spots. I designed this system, and tragic accidents happen to young women all the time. Slip and fall, hit your head, die before anyone finds you. Very sad. Very final." He stepped closer. Lydia backed away, her mind racing through options. Fight, run, scream, all of them likely to end with a bullet. "Before you kill me, tell me one thing. What happened that day at Edisto? How did you do it?" Thaddeus smiled, and it was the most terrible thing Lydia had ever seen. "You really don't remember, do you? The therapist said trauma could do that. Lock away memories too painful to process. I suppose watching your uncle drug your orange juice and carry you to a boat would qualify." Cold spread through Lydia's chest. "You kidnapped me. I saved you from a life of being Cornelius's perfect daughter. From growing up in his shadow, watching him mold you into whatever he needed you to be. I gave you freedom, and I made $30 million selling you to people who wanted a child they could train from scratch." Lydia's vision blurred. Trafficking. He'd sold her to a trafficking ring. But I escaped. You got lucky. The people who bought you were transporting you through the Appalachians when you woke up still groggy from the drugs and somehow managed to open the van door and jump out. They searched for hours but couldn't find you. You disappeared into the woods like a ghost." He laughed. "I had to scramble. Found a homeless girl in Charleston about your age, similar build. Drugged her, drowned her in the bathtub, tattooed a magnolia on her neck while she was dying. Dumped the body in the ocean and called Cornelius crying that I'd found Rosalind washed up on shore." Lydia's stomach heaved. She swallowed bile. "You murdered a child to cover your crime." "I solved a problem. The girl was going to die on the streets anyway. I just accelerated the timeline and gave her a purpose. Rosalind Ashford's corpse. The body that let Cornelius grieve and move on and sign over the company's shares I needed." He raised the gun level with her chest. "And now you're going to serve a purpose too. The waitress who tragically died in an accident before the DNA results came back. Cornelius will grieve again, but at least this time he'll know the truth. His daughter really is dead. Has been for 20 years. The door behind Lydia burst open. Cornelius stood in the entrance, flanked by 2 security guards with weapons drawn. His face was white, eyes wide with an emotion beyond rage. "Step away from her, Thaddeus." Thaddeus swung the gun toward his brother. "Cornelius, I can explain. You sold my daughter. You murdered a homeless child. You let me bury a stranger and spend 20 years drowning in grief. What explanation could possibly matter? I did it for the family, for the company. You were weak, destroyed by fatherhood, turning Ashford Shipping into a charity case. Someone had to be strong enough to save it. By selling my child to traffickers." Cornelius's voice was barely human. "By doing what needed to be done. And I'd do it again because look at us now. Look at what the company became under my leadership. We're worth billions. Billions, Cornelius. That doesn't happen with weakness." "Put the gun down." One of the security guards spoke calmly, professionally. Thaddeus shook his head. "You're not taking me alive. I'm not spending the rest of my life in prison for making hard choices, for being the one willing to sacrifice for the greater good." He turned the gun on Lydia. "If I can't have the company, neither can she. If I'm going down, she's coming with—" The gunshot was impossibly loud in the enclosed space. Thaddeus jerked, stumbled, the weapon falling from his hand. He looked down at the spreading red stain on his polo shirt, then up at Cornelius with something like surprise. "You shot me." His voice was almost wondering. Cornelius held the security guard's service weapon steady, his finger still on the trigger. "I did. Because some debts can only be paid in blood, and you bankrupted this family 20 years ago." Thaddeus collapsed. The guards rushed forward, one kicking the fallen gun away while the other checked for a pulse. Cornelius dropped the weapon and moved to Lydia, his hands on her shoulders. "Are you hurt? Did he touch you?" Lydia shook her head, unable to speak. Cornelius pulled her against his chest, and she felt him trembling, felt 20 years of grief and rage and betrayal shaking through him in waves. "I'm sorry. God, I'm so sorry. I should have protected you, should have known, should have trusted my mother when she said something was wrong." Police sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. One guard spoke into a radio while the other applied pressure to Thaddeus's chest wound. He was still breathing, still conscious, staring at the ceiling with eyes that couldn't comprehend how the story had ended like this. Dorothea appeared in the doorway, moving faster than Lydia had ever seen her move, the cane forgotten. She took one look at Thaddeus bleeding on the floor and spat. "Good. Let him suffer like he made us suffer." Then she turned to Lydia, her face crumpling. "My baby. My sweet girl. You're home. You're finally home." Lydia felt something break open inside her chest. Not quite memory, but the echo of it, of this woman's voice singing lullabies, of strong arms holding her safe, of magnolias and promises and a life that had been stolen before she'd had a chance to remember it clearly. "Nona!" The word slipped out before she could stop it. Old word, Gullah word, the name she'd called Dorothea before the world had shattered. Dorothea sobbed, reaching for her, and Lydia let herself be held by a woman whose DNA she shared, but whose face was new and ancient all at once. The police arrived. Paramedics loaded Thaddeus onto a stretcher, handcuffed to the rails, still alive but barely. The recording equipment Cornelius's security team had planted in the carriage house had captured everything, every confession, every threat, every word of a monologue that would send a man to prison for the rest of his life. 2 hours later, Vivian Lockhart was arrested at her father's estate, trying to board a private jet to the Cayman Islands. Her phone records showed coordination with Thaddeus payments made to hire the hitman who'd tampered with Marco's IV line. She screamed about lawyers and immunity deals all the way into the police car, but nobody was listening anymore. The night stretched long and strange. Police interviews, crime scene investigators, reporters gathering at the gates like sharks drawn to blood. Lydia answered questions mechanically until Cornelius's attorney stepped in and shut it down, citing trauma and the need for rest. Marco was awake when Lydia finally made it back to his room, his good eye tracking her movements. "You're okay?" Not a question. A prayer answered. "I'm okay. Thaddeus confessed everything. He's going to prison." Marco's hand found hers, squeezed once, twice, 3 times. She squeezed back, feeling the weight of everything that had happened settle into her bones. She'd walked into the Ashford room 2 days ago as nobody. Now she was Rosalind Ashford, heir to a shipping fortune, survivor of trafficking, daughter of 2 fathers who'd each saved her in different ways. "Rest, Daddy. We'll talk tomorrow." She kissed his forehead and left him to sleep. Dawn broke over Charleston with the kind of light that made the city look like a painting. Lydia stood at the window of Rosalind's old room, watching the harbor wake up, ships moving like memories across water that had carried millions of stories before hers and would carry millions more after. A knock at the door. James Whitmore entered carrying a leather portfolio and the careful expression of someone bearing news that would change everything. "The DNA results arrived an hour ago. I wanted to deliver them personally." He opened the portfolio, pulled out a document with an official seal. 99.7% probability. You are Rosalind Ashford, biological daughter of Cornelius Ashford and the late Catherine Ashford. The state of South Carolina recognizes you as a recovered missing person. Your birth certificate will be reissued. Your inheritance is being processed. Lydia took the paper with numb fingers, stared at the numbers that proved what her body had already known. "There's more." Whitmore pulled out another photograph. A painting clearly old, clearly damaged. A woman in her 30s holding a magnolia flower, her face obscured by yellowed varnish and a diagonal tear through the canvas. "This is your great-great-grandmother, Isabel Ashford, painted in 1873. It survived the Civil War reconstruction, 150 years of history, but it needs someone with the skill to bring it back. Mr. Ashford believes you're that person." Lydia studied the damage, the careful brushwork beneath the decay, the story waiting to be revealed. "Where is it?" "Downstairs. He had it brought from storage this morning." She found Cornelius in the sunroom, standing beside an easel where the painting waited. Morning light streamed across the damaged canvas, revealing every crack, every place where time had stolen color and clarity. He turned as she entered. "I know it's asking a lot, after everything that's happened, but I thought—" He paused. "I thought maybe you'd want to do what you were trained to do. Bring back what's been hidden. Show us who we really are beneath all the years and damage." Lydia approached the painting, examined the tear, the varnish, the places where amateur hands had made things worse trying to make them better. It would take months, maybe a year. Careful work with solvents and patience and hands steady enough to separate destruction from intention. But beneath the decay she could see it. The ghost of a woman who'd survived a war, who'd rebuilt a family from ruins, who'd held magnolias like they meant something more than beauty. Marco appeared in this doorway, moving slowly but under his own power, one nurse hovering nearby. He looked at the painting, at Lydia, at Cornelius. "She's the best I've ever seen. When she was 12, she restored a music box I found in a barn. Thing hadn't worked in 50 years. She brought it back to life." Cornelius smiled, and for the first time since Lydia had met him, it reached his eyes. "Then she's an Ashford after all. We're good at surviving." Dorothea joined them, moving silently despite the cane, her face softer than Lydia had seen it. She looked at the painting, at her granddaughter, at the 2 men who'd each given this girl life in different ways. "You are magnolia flowers and mountain strength," she said quietly. "All of it, every piece, and we love every piece." Lydia felt tears sliding down her face, but they weren't grief anymore. They were something else. Something that felt like the first day of spring after a winter that had lasted 20 years. She picked up a brush from the supply kit someone had assembled, dipped it in solvent, touched it carefully to the varnish, and watched centuries of yellowing begin to dissolve, revealing color beneath. Blues and greens, and the suggestion of a face that had waited more than a century to be seen clearly again. Behind her, her fathers, both of them, stood together. Her grandmother hummed something old and gullah about roots that grew deep enough to survive any storm. And Lydia worked, bringing back what had been lost, proving that some things survived even when the world tried its hardest to destroy them. The brush moved in steady strokes. The varnish gave way layer by layer. And slowly, impossibly, Isabel Ashford's face emerged strong and defiant, holding a magnolia flower, like a promise that some things were worth protecting no matter the cost. Lydia stepped back, examining her work. The painting was still damaged, still torn, still carrying the scars of everything it had survived. But the woman beneath was visible now, real, whole in a way that had nothing to do with perfection and everything to do with truth. She turned to face the three people who'd saved her in different ways across different lives. "I need to tell you something. All of you." They waited. "I don't know if I'll ever fully remember being Rosalind, the girl who painted magnolias and played on Edisto Island and called you Nonna. That life is gone. The trauma took it. And maybe it's mercy that I don't have to carry those memories." She looked at Marco. "But Lydia is real too. The girl you found in that orphanage, the girl you raised, the woman I became. I can't erase her to become someone else." Then at Cornelius. "So if you're looking for your daughter to come back exactly as she was, I'm going to disappoint you, because I'm not her anymore. I'm what's left after surviving the unsurvivable." Cornelius crossed the room, took her hands in his. "Then that's who I'll love, because she's the woman my daughter became. The woman who's strong enough to restore paintings and families and lives that everyone else gave up for dead. And that's enough. That's more than I ever dreamed I'd have." Marco moved closer, his voice rough. "You're my daughter too. The adoption papers say it. The last 20 years prove it. Biology doesn't change that. Nothing does." Dorothea rested her hand on Lydia's shoulder. "Child, listen to me. You are not Rosalind or Lydia. You are not one thing or the other. You are both and neither, and something new entirely. You are the magnolia that survived the transplanting. Different soil, different light, but the same strength running through you." She paused, her eyes bright. "And that strength, that's pure Ashford. That's mountain grit and low country grace all mixed together. That's survival made flesh. So you be whoever you need to be, and we'll love every version of you we get." Lydia looked at the three of them, the father who'd searched, the father who'd found, the grandmother who'd known. A family built from fragments and held together by something stronger than blood, by choice, by refusal to let go, by love that survived even when hope didn't. "Okay," she whispered. "Then let's build something new. Let's be a family that doesn't pretend the past didn't happen, but doesn't let it define everything that comes next either." She turned back to the painting, picked up the brush again, let the motion of restoration ground her in the present while honoring the past. "Home isn't a place you return to," she said softly, the words rising from somewhere deep. "It's a place you build with people who refuse to let you disappear." Behind her, Cornelius and Marco stood shoulder to shoulder. Two fathers, one daughter. Dorothea settled into a chair, her cane resting against mahogany, older than the war that had nearly destroyed everything the Ashfords had built. And Lydia worked, brought color back to canvas life, back to faces truth, back to stories that had been buried under varnish and lies in 20 years of grief. Outside, Charleston kept spinning its tales of history and heritage. Inside, the Ashford family was writing a new chapter. And this time, nobody was disappearing. The magnolias were blooming. The harbor was singing. And somewhere in the space between who she'd been and who she'd become, Lydia Thorne Rosalind Ashford was finally impossibly home.